One of the the speeches in the publication, The Logic of Zionism, you refer to the self-immolation of Aaron Bushnell, who was a young military young man in the United States who, in protest to what the military was carrying out, set fire to himself. And you answered, particularly a journalist who hailed that. Could you speak more on that? Because I think it was a really very significant difference of perspective that were raised by Chris Hedges, who was the journalist, and our movement.
Well, there's no question that the events in Gaza, the staggering brutality of the Israeli assault on Gaza, and the complicity of every capitalist government, certainly all the major imperialist powers, in this atrocity, provoked immense and deep-felt outrage among the youth. Young people, that time of one's life is a period where one is very sensitive to hypocrisy, injustice, the chasm which exists between the ideals which are proclaimed and the reality of political life. And so there was protests all over the world, but as is always the case, these protests oriented to the bourgeoisie, capitalist governments' appeals to their humanity go nowhere. They can't accomplish anything because what drives these events are powerful economic, social, class interests. And so Aaron Bushnell, who a young man, he had been in the Air Force, which of course creates its own specific traumas, apart from international events. And I think I point out in that lecture, there's a very high percentage of suicides among individuals who have been in the American Air Force. He decided to make a sacrifice of his life in the hope that he could shock the world and shock the conscience of the ruling class. He's not the first person to do that. There's a very famous event that took place in 1938. It involved a young man whose last name was Greenspan. Greenspan was a Jewish youth from Poland. His parents had suffered persecution. He was in Paris, and he went to the German embassy in Paris, and he wound up shooting. It was, I believe, on the 7th or 8th of early November 1938. He wound up killing a embassy official by the name of von Rath. In response to this, his name was Herschel Greenspan. In response to the action of Herschel Greenspan, the Nazis organized their pogrom, the infamous Kristallnacht. At that time, all the major political tendencies in France denounced Herschel Greenspan, not just the right-wing parties, the mainstream bourgeois parties, but the Socialist Party and the Communist Party all denounced Greenspan for his provocation. And the defense of Greenspan, in what is a wonderful and very haunting essay, was from one written by Leon Trotsky in defense of Greenspan. And he solidarized himself with the anger and outrage felt by this youth. But at the same time, he said that the path which Greenspan had chosen was incorrect. He noted the fact that the Stalinist press, claimed that Greenspan had been around the Trotskyist movement. And Trotsky said, if only that had been true, we would have shown him another path. He wouldn't have engaged in an act essentially of political suicide. He would have understood the futility of a politics which believes that the politics of capitalism and the interests of capitalism can be changed by the lone avenger. That statement has, of course, renewed relevance in the most recent events that have taken place in New York City, where a young man has killed a corporate executive in the healthcare industry. It's obviously a tragedy. We obviously have no truck for the healthcare industry, but we don't believe that killing individual representatives is correct. It's wrong, and it's a useless sacrifice of the life of the individual who did it. It doesn't raise the consciousness of the working class, far from it. To the extent that people look for individual solutions, even if they have an element of self-sacrifice or martyrdom, it does not contribute to the basic problem, that is, of raising the consciousness of the working class and developing the understanding for the necessity of mass action, of a working class imbued with a sense of its historical mission. And while we can express sympathy for the youth who himself apparently suffered from severe medical problems, it's not clear whether his own medical problems were directly related to the healthcare industry. He's from a wealthy family, but it may well be the case that it made him more aware and conscious of broader problems. But the methods he chose were incorrect. And we felt that given the mass protests surrounding the Gaza crisis, we had to counter any tendency which glorifies martyrdom. Our aim was not to attack Chris Hedges as an individual. He's a gifted journalist. But the problem with what he wrote, or everything he writes, is that it is very much dominated by a thoroughly personal, subjective outlook, deeply demoralized, and one which sees no possibility for the development of a revolutionary movement of the working class. In fact, quite the opposite. The religious outlook is one which is invariably associated with the deepest demoralization. The working class does not need spiritual renewal, it needs intellectual renewal. It needs understanding of the historical process. It needs political program. It has to understand the necessity of unifying the class on an international scale. It has to also understand the necessity for self-action by the class. And so for that reason, we felt it was important to respond and to very clearly explain to young people, and the lecture was given at Wayne State University, that is not the path to take. Don't waste your life, don't throw your life away. Utilize your life to build a mass movement. That's the correct path to take. Build a socialist movement.